What's up, bikers? In this video, I'm going to guide you through how to get started on training for mountain biking. This is one of a three-part series where we're going from very basic to more advanced movements so that you have a good foundation when you start training specifically to get better on the bike. I'm Johnny Thompson, founder of Fit4Racing, where we have helped mountain bikers from pro to amateur all across the globe to get better on the bike. Fitness and ability. In this series, we're going to break down some of the fundamentals that you'll need when you're starting your off-season training. So we're going to look at good movement, strength foundations, but we're going to leave the capacity and conditioning for another series later on. So if you really don't know where to start with training, this is the video for you. And in this first one, it's going to be super simple, and all you're going to need is a band, a kettlebell or some kind of weight, and a bench, box or chair. Although this series is very basic, it's a good foundation and what we call an on-ramp for further training. But if you're already comfortable in a gym and you know how to train well, then visit fit4racing.com and you can skip straight to one of our holistic programs specifically for mountain biking. Choose your discipline, enduro, downhill or trail, and get started today. Otherwise, follow along and we're going to start super simple with stretching and warm-up. It's important that before doing any exercise you're prepared, so raising your heart rate will help blood flow and feel ready for the upcoming movements. 5 to 10 minutes on a stationary bike, assault bike, skipping, even a light run will be enough to then get started with the mobility. Once you've done your 5 to 10 minute warm-up, we're then going to do some stretching. It's important now that we hit every angle that we're going to be hitting whilst doing some loaded and more weight-bearing exercise. This way we know that we can get into the position safely and we can actually reach positions that are more optimal for riding and performance. So first of all, we're going to do a pigeon stretch where I'm trying to get my shin 90 degrees to my hips. I'm going to hold that 30 seconds each side. So left and then right. You might find that there's differences in how tight you are either side. Just pay attention to that as you get along with your training. Once you've done the pigeon stretch, you can flip over, and this here is called a 90-90 stretch. So the first leg is in that pigeon position, but the back one, again 90 degrees at the hip and knee, you're going to look over. So what we've done there is internal rotation and external rotation of the hip, like I said at the start, hitting every angle. So again, 30 seconds on each side, and that should have opened the hips quite well. After that, we're then going to take a big lunge, look at a more global stretch. So hitting bigger angles with a little bit of movement through. From here, if you're comfortable enough, so rotations through the hip, pinning that foot down, back knee off the ground. If you're comfortable there, what you can do is push that knee away and get a little bit more stretch through that front groin, or even standing straight up, get more of a stretch through the back hip flexor. Again, 30 seconds, each side should be fine. And then moving on to ankles. So because we're going to start with a squat, it's important that we work the ankle in this dorsiflexion so that the knee can come ahead of the toe as far as possible, and I'll explain why whilst we're doing the squat. So 30 seconds static, hold each side. And then we're going to take a box position. From here, feeding through, shoulder to the ground and reaching 5 each side. And then while we're still placed in this position, what we call a down dog. So for your yoga followers out there, you'll be familiar with this. A down dog into up dog or cobra, whatever you want to call it. Holding about 5 seconds on each, 5 times. Then we're about ready to look at the upper body. So this is a general stretching routine that you might want to do before general movement. If you're following the full program, we'll give you more of a holistic warm-up protocol depending on the complexity and the difficulty of the movements to follow. So there I was just stretching a tricep and lat, reaching down my back on each one, 30 seconds on each, and then crossing the shoulder each way, 30 seconds, and then 4 directions of the head, 30 seconds on each, and that's our global general stretching done, and we'll get on now with the movements. Oh yeah! The first movement is a goblet squat, and although we're going straight in with weight, this is going to help your form. So ultimately what we want you to do is establish a good squat technique. So we'll start without the weight first, because we'll talk about what's happening lower down before then the counterbalancing effect of the weight to help you into a good position. So what we're going to do here is more of an Olympic lifting style squat, which is wide, squatting between the hips and not over like a powerlifting squat. So this is predominantly quads, but let's explain all of that while we go. So you're going for about shoulder width with your feet with neutral toes pointing outwards, and then from there a slight external rotation before you start any movement whatsoever. And that will draw your knees out and engage your glutes. At the same time, bracing your obliques will lock down your core, because with this and many other movements, your priority is to stay safe through your midline. And by bracing your obliques, that's going to lock down your spine, and so it stays neutral throughout all movement. And then from there, you're not going to be able to pick up your kettlebell because you're totally fucking tense. Pick it up, forget about fall. So from there, with your kettlebell, you should then be able to keep your torso as vertical as possible while squatting down. And your goal is to reach a position that's as low as you can go whilst maintaining your lower back curve. You won't need to pause once you've established the depth. The further out you go with the kettlebell, the more counterbalancing effect, but the harder obviously on your arms. You're going to do 5 to 10 of those, 5 times round with a minute rest in between. Each time you go, be very careful of your awareness on that bottom position. What we don't want is this rounded back position and also overextended at the top. So by doing this, we're establishing good position, so later in the course or in this series, we can load more safely with heavier weights. The second part of day one, we're going to break up into 3 movements. And you're going to do that 3 times round in what we call a superset. So that's where you do one movement, then the next consecutively and start back with a little bit of rest in between. This allows you to hit more body parts. So if I was to only do one of these movements to optimize the benefits, you'd have to rest quite a lot of time. But in that time, we can squeeze opposing muscle groups. So The movements are rear foot elevated split squat. So for this, I'm using a box. You can use a chair. You don't have to load at this stage, but it gets a nice, good range through whilst getting a stretch in your quad and hip flexor on that back leg. So again, maintaining your lower back curve, a nice rhythmic movement, 10 to 15 each side. The second movement, you're going to need a band, a TheraBand, or a light band that you might find in a functional gym. Here, I'm literally taking a little part of it and hooking with my thumbs. This way, I know that my arms, there's no tension on the band while my arms are directly in front of my shoulders. And then, lock down your middle. This is quite important. So I don't just say this because trainers say, lock down your midline, blah, 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 blah. It's because my obliques will attach or influence the tension in my lats, which then will draw my shoulder back and down so that as I perform the movement, not only will it stay off my traps, which we don't want to work because they're a bit secondary to the upper mid back that we want to be working, but also it helps me establish a good connection between my core and back, and that awareness helps all of my functionality afterwards in movements that we'll do a little bit more specific for riding. So if I'm able to link my upper to my core, it means that I can link my upper to my core to my lower, which is exactly what we need to be good performers. So 10 to 15 band pull aparts. You should feel a burn in your mid back, upper back, and not on the traps. And the third movement, a regular push-up, but it's important that we do these well to save elbows, shoulders, get good function through the movement so that you know when we load or do things more explosively, then you've got a good foundation and you're not going to get all funky tendonitis or shoulder issues where ultimately we want to save the injuries for on the bike. Injuries off the bike but caused by biking, not in the gym. Here we go. So the push-up, start on your knees. You might be able to do a push-up on your toes, but regardless of that, start on your knees just for the purpose of establishing good movement. So like the squat, where your toes are pointing neutrally and a little external rotation, that's the same for the push-up here. So what we're doing there is bringing the elbows back, and then I'm going to start the full movement on my knees, taking my toes off the ground, twisting back, chest to the ground, touch, lock out at the top. This way, with the external rotation, much like a hip, it keeps that ball and socket joint healthy, functional, and it stops you coming around, working the traps and getting this rounded dysfunction. What we want is the ability to perform this movement under high load, high reps to build the muscular endurance needed to ride better without then causing injury. Because the gym isn't our primary focus necessarily, it is how it affects the bike. So 10 to 15, if you can't do that on your toes, then go to your knees. Otherwise, toe push-ups, full range, chest to the ground, lock out at the top is ideal. And the format of this superset was 3 movements with about 30 seconds rest in between each and move around it 10 to 15 reps of each for 3 rounds total. No training day is complete without hitting core. You can train core pretty much every day, especially isometric. We love isometric core movements like the side plank because it'll teach you to brace and resist rotation, which will really help your ability on the bike, but also linking upper and lower body. So we're doing side planks 3 to 5 times for as long as you can on each side. The side plank being elbow to the ground and trying to create a straight line with torso, thighs, legs, without any kink through your midline. So don't drop your shoulder forwards, keep that stacked. And then from there, whatever you want to do with this spare hand, what I like to do is touch myself on my obliques so that I know that they're turned on. And I'm doing the right type of movement. That's it for day one. Have a rest day for at least one day between this and day two. Before hitting day two, make sure that you do the bike and heart raising warm-up and stretching that we did before day one. Day two, we're going to take a look at a different primary movement. On day one, we looked at quads on the squat. Today, we're going to look at posterior chains, so glutes and hamstrings on the hinge. Probably one of the most important positions to be in and establish as a rider, because as you'll see, the hinge replicates a position on the bike. Regardless of where my feet are, it's through the hips, and this is what we're going to establish with the movement, a stiff leg deadlift. So the kettlebell is going to form something that has a little bit of feedback for me. It's not necessarily there to strengthen at this stage. We will be loading in the following weeks. But for now, the feedback is important so that you can establish the hinge with a little bit of loading so you can feel the muscles that are supposed to be working in the movement. So before we skip ahead, I already skipped ahead, so let's reverse that and start with the foundation of the movement, which is toes pointing forwards directly under my hips, and then from there, core braced. Most important part, because the deadlift eventually is probably going to be one of the heaviest lifts that you'll do whilst training. So contrary to popular belief, the majority of people actually fail a deadlift through their core. So it then doesn't become a posterior chain exercise, it becomes a core test. So if you're ever going to go heavy in the future, make note now that it should be technical maxes, so as much weight as you can whilst maintaining your form. Otherwise, you're going to compromise your safety, but also be working less than ideal muscle groups. So from there, what you might find is that while you're reaching for the kettlebell, you actually can't establish a neutral spine. So for now, bend your knees until you can pick up the kettlebell and stand all the way to the top. So we're going to start from the top, having picked up the kettlebell safely, bringing shoulders back and down, bracing the spine, and then gently trying to keep your head in line with your torso. So imagine the back of your neck and your skull being part of your spinal curve. From there, allow the kettlebell to come out in front of you whilst pushing your hips back, bracing well, but absolutely not dropping the kettlebell and staying soft. So you need active upper mid back, and then from there, coming straight back up. There's a tendency on this movement to think too much about the kettlebell and allow it to own you, like this. Instead, own the kettlebell with a solid foundation of position, and only go down as far as you can whilst maintaining your lower back curve and keeping vertical shins. If I went further there, that's all spine. So then we reduce the impact on the muscles we want to be working, but also we're failing to establish good movement patterns that then reflect well on your bike position. For this part A, we're going to do 5 to 10 reps, 5 times, with about a minute off in between each. After doing the primary movement, which was the hinge, we're going to do another superset like day one, the same format, 3 different movements with a little bit of rest in between, 3 times round. Those movements are going to be a squat with a knee touch. So this is to help you establish the same type of movement that we did on day one, but with a little extra or a little difference, just to mix things up and get good functioning hips. So you're going to squat, then touch a knee down, stand up, squat again, touch your knee down the opposite side, stand up. Do 10 to 20 of these, and then we're going to move on to a banded row. The banded row is a great way to build upper mid-back strength if you don't have access to a gym. We're going to use it today, not just for upper mid-back strength, but also to take a look at the importance of the hinge in other movements. So under your feet, taking quite a lot of load on the band, taking the same position of the stiff leg deadlift with priority on your lower back curve, you're then going to row the band while still maintaining your solid, good position. As you can see in this position, anecdotally looks very much like a good riding position and a good strengthening that's going to reflect well on your ability on the bike. And then to finish off, we're going to do a pike push-up. So a variation of the push-up, the fundamentals stay the same, however the angle changes. We're going to load up from a down dog starting position. Your head's going to reach the ground and press out overhead. So by doing the pike push-up, we're just establishing a little loading through the shoulder, good function everywhere to have that foundation to train thereafter. If you want to load up further on the pike push-up, you can use your box, feet on it, and then load a little higher, and then the principles remain the same. It's a little bit more difficult, so be cautious on that one. So again, 3 times around that, and we're going to finish with a core exercise. Every training day finishes well with a core exercise. This time we're going to ramp the pace a little bit more, because in the future videos we're going to show you a little bit more of the conditioning side. It's not all going to be slow pace stuff. We're going to be heavy, fast, dynamic, and ultimately by the end of all of the videos that we do in this off season, you'll have everything you need to be an amazing bike rider. Physically, we can't help with the skills, unfortunately. Not yet anyway. So we're doing a Tabata style hollow rock. So it's 20 seconds of work on the hollow rock, and then a 10-second rest. Then we're going alternating V up. So both arms up, you're going to touch in the middle, swapping each time for 20 seconds, 10 seconds rest, and then get back to the hollow rock. Do that for as long as possible with the goal of 4 minutes. So that's 8 rounds of the Tabata. Once you're done, I'm sure you'll get a nice, solid core. That's the first week of movements that should form a good foundation to then train upon. Next week, we're going to show you some more complex movements, a little bit of loading, and then the week after, a little bit more. And after that, we're going to take a look at the principles of capacity building, interval training, and lots of bike-specific things. So subscribe to our channel, make sure that you see it first, but also check out Fit4Racing.com, where we have bike-specific programs. So if you want to skip all of this and start in the deep end, then get after it and sign up to an enduro, downhill, or trail program today. And if you do, I'll see you there. Peace.